What's up guys, Elliot here, and today we're taking a look at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. It can be a bit hit and miss in Baku, with the race either being chaotic and enthralling or a bit dull, and unfortunately I felt like this race was the latter. Although as we'll get onto, the Ferrari DNFs did take the sting out of the battle at the front. However, we did get some interesting twists, turns and talking points, so let's dive into them. Before we take a look at the race, I want to quickly mention quali. After the first runs in Q3, it was looking like Sainz might have finally gotten one over Charles and was on course for pole. But then Charles managed to pull out an incredible lap on his final run in Q3, as we have so often seen him do this season. Mega lap from Charles, and unfortunately for Carlos, to compound the issue, both the Red Bulls got the better of him. It was actually looking like in Q1 and Q2, with the Red Bulls ahead of the Ferraris, it was looking like a Red Bull pole, but yet again Charles Leclerc doing the business for Ferrari. He is just driving so well this year, and unfortunately for Carlos that did consign him to P4, but it was still all to play for in the race. Firstly, I want to talk about Ferrari. Checo did manage to get Charles into turn 1, and then looked to be dropping him in the early few laps, but Charles was able to reel him back in despite the pressure from Max behind. Carlos was falling behind the front 3 when his hydraulics went on lap 9. Charles then pitted for a new set of tyres, with both the Red Bulls staying out. And then at this point in the race, I'm thinking, okay, that's a nice aggressive strategy from Ferrari. It looks like they've got the jump on Red Bull, despite possibly not having the pace, and maybe going to steal the win. And then it's worst case scenario, Charles has an engine issue on lap 20 and it puts him out, and that's a double DNF for Ferrari. But it's pretty much worst case scenario for Ferrari. Not only are they scoring 0 points in Baku, it almost consigns Leclerc to engine penalties further down the line, because I think that's his second power unit now, and you're only allowed 3 during the season before you start picking up penalties. So this result now puts Charles 34 points off the lead, when, let's remember, he himself had a 34 point lead after Australia, but that was over George Russell. He actually had a 46 point lead over Max Verstappen. So that is an 80 point swing in 5 races. But in my opinion, it's not all doom and gloom for Ferrari. And let me explain why. We've got a freeze on the engines until the end of 2025, which means the power unit can't be upgraded for performance reasons, but it can be fixed for reliability. So it makes a lot of sense, in my opinion, that Ferrari's just piled on as much performance as possible, potentially introducing reliability issues into the engine and power unit, but that is something that they can fix later. So it's possibly a little bit of short-term pain for long-term gain, certainly for the next few seasons. Ferrari fans, I know it might be painful right now, but I think there could be good things around the corner. And then on to Red Bull. Perez got Leclerc into turn 1 and then appeared to try and gap him, but I think he might have overcooked his tyres because he was struggling really early on with traction. And Perez is meant to be the tyre whisperer, right? We've heard for years how good on his tyres he is. But in this race, Max appeared to have the edge on Perez, and it all seemed to be down to tyres in my opinion. Max getting the best out of the tyres, both in terms of performance and tyre life, with Checo in the first stint overcooking his tyres, and on the second stint just not having a match in pace on Max at all. I think the big question on all of our lips were, are Red Bull going to let Perez fight? And the answer was a resounding no. As soon as Max closed in on Perez got the call from his engineer to not fight back, and it was a pretty easy pass into turn 1 for Max. I'm sorry Sergio Perez fans, I'm sorry Sergio, but you're the number 2 driver in Red Bull. Yes, you might be allowed to have the odd win here or there, and it might not be in your contract that you are the number 2 driver, but you're always going to be playing second fiddle to Max. Max is going to make sure of that. Max's dad is going to make sure of that. I think Christian tends to have a favourite driver, and Max is that driver. If you think back to the Rubens Barrichello, Michael Schumacher days, Rubens was allowed to get the odd win, but more often than not, 9 times out of 10, was asked to move aside from Michael Schumacher. And Red Bull right now have that system employed. They have a number 1 and they have a number 2 driver. It might not be in their contracts, but that's the way that Red Bull have been operating. Once Max was through, it was a pretty easy win for him. It was a leisurely Sunday drive and a nice chat with his radio engineer. It's a fantastic weekend for Red Bull. When their closest rivals don't score any points, it's a 1-2 and fastest lap for the team. So fantastic result for Red Bull. They're looking incredibly strong, and I don't see why they're not going to be favourites to win in Canada next week. A good result for Mercedes on the face of it, P3 and P4, but any promise that they were getting on top of their porpoising issues have gone out the window. To be fair, a lot of teams were really struggling with porpoising in Baku, but Mercedes is one of the worst teams in terms of bouncing. Both George and Lewis very vocal this weekend, with George Russell, the director of the GPDA, saying, well, I think it's just a matter of time before we see a major incident. And on one hand, I definitely see his point of view. The bouncing is pretty awful on a number of cars, Mercedes and Ferrari seeming to be one of the worst affected by that. And I do think it's just a matter of time before we see a car shake itself apart. But then also potentially bouncing, if somebody's bouncing and they get a bit of oversteer and they can't correct it because their car's light at a certain point and crashes, I mean, that's going to be pretty horrific and a pretty awful crash, because the bouncing does seem to be occurring at higher speeds, so it's likely to be an incredibly high speed accident. So on one hand, I definitely see George's point of view, but on the other hand, I feel like there might be some team games going on now. Mercedes seemingly very vocal this weekend, and a number of other teams very vocal, and I do wonder if they're trying to level the playing field or even peg back their rivals, mainly Red Bull, by maybe trying to introduce a minimum ride height. I see both sides of the argument. I agree that there are safety concerns, but equally I think it's unfair for teams like Red Bull that have absolutely nailed the regulations, built a car that doesn't porpoise, possibly Adrian Newey's experience and vast experience in F1 paying dividends, and why should they be penalised for that when their rivals haven't gotten on top of their porpoising issues? And let's not forget, there is an easy fix for porpoising. You just have to increase your ride height. And why aren't the teams doing that? Well, it costs them a bunch of lap time, and they're not going to do that. And while the drivers are complaining about feeling sore, I mean, I don't know if you saw Lewis getting out of the car, but he looked pretty stiff and looked like his back had taken a bit of a beating. But if it's that bad, then their team need to, say, look, this is getting unsafe, and we need to slow the car down by increasing the ride height until we get on top of our porpoising issues. Yeah, that's my thought on the porpoising, and the Mercedes, really not looking good at all, but still managing to pull off a 3-4, so I think that's great for them. Another podium for George. He is so consistent right now, it's ridiculous. He's driving really, really well. But I find it crazy how close Lewis was to George just before the first VSC, and then Lewis had to double stack behind George, and that put him behind, I think it was Sebastian Vettel, and for a number of reasons Lewis had to overtake a ton of cars, and Lewis had to work really quite hard to get back into P4, whereas for George it seems to be pretty plain sailing. I think it's going to be probably another difficult weekend for Mercedes in Montreal next time out, because the track is pretty similar to Baku, a very long straight, so we'll have to see what they can pull out of the bag next week. Let's clear up the results for the rest of the field. Excellent drive for Pierre Gasly, running in P4 until Hamilton got him at the end, but still an excellent result for him. P5 in the end. Yuki with a weird issue with the DRS flap that I had not seen before. One half appeared to be broken and flapping. He got shown the black and orange flag, which means you have to come into the pits to fix the issue or retire the car. So the team proceeded to gaffer tape the wing down. Probably one of the dodgiest repairs I've ever seen. I'm pretty sure I've wrapped some Christmas presents better than that, and that's not saying much. That was a shame for AlphaTauri because it was looking like a really good double points finish for them up until that point. Vettel was having a great race, running up in the points until he ran deep into turn 3, overtaking Ocon, which was a little bit weird because he'd already got the place, but just seemed to outbrake himself going into turn 3. It did redeem him though with the best spin of the weekend. That was just, it was so close to the barrier. Although he had a bit of a mare rejoining clumsily into the path of Yuki Tsunoda, so a bit of a shame there. Still a P6 for Vettel though. Maybe he could have done one better if he didn't go deep into turn 3, although he didn't lose too much time because he was pretty swift with that spin. Stroll unfortunately retired, but it was a messy weekend for him, clipping the barriers left, right and centre. He clipped the barriers in practice, 2 crashes in qualifying, so maybe it was for the best for Lance. One to forget for him. Then on to Alpine. It was P7 for Alonso, P10 for Ocon. Both Alpines seemed to be moving roadblocks for the grid. They had really good straight line speed, but then they were a bit slow for the rest of the lap. Actually, maybe a good time to bring up DRS. It did seem to be quite a bit less effective this weekend when we've seen it to be super powerful in the past. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it was because of the porpoising. Maybe there wasn't a headwind this time round. If you have a headwind, then that means the car in front is just punching an even bigger hole in the air. So possibly there was a tailwind which was decreasing the effect of the DRS as well, but for a number of laps we saw so many drivers not able to get past and only really just closing in by the end of the braking zone. Really, for DRS to be perfect and not too powerful, not too weak, you really want the driver to be just getting alongside in the braking zone so that they're doing the overtaking on the brakes. McLaren just seemed to be all about team orders this race, which is good for Daniel because it meant he was on the same bit of track as Lando. Daniel was asked to hold station behind Lando early in the race before the team returned the favour to Daniel later on in the race, with Lando closing in on him. Lando seemed to be pretty frustrated at the end there. I think he even said after that he could have got him if he wanted to, but thankfully for him and his relationship with the team, he just held station. So it was a P8 for Daniel and a P9 for Lando. Good double points finish for McLaren. So it was a P11 for Bottas and a DNF for Zhou, which was a bit of a shame for Zhou because he was having one of his best races in F1 to date, but he had to retire due to reliability issues. Then on to Williams, it was a P12 for Albon and a P15 for Latifi. Odd accident for Alex Albon in practice, seemed to just get distracted, maybe looking at his wheel, and just drove into the wall. And then for Latifi, well, I mean, his race was ruined before it even started. One of his team members was still on the grid within that 15-second warning period before the formation lap, which is an instant penalty, and it's a nasty one as well, which is a 10-second stop and go penalty, which with the pit entry and pit exit adds up to about 30 plus seconds, so pretty nasty penalty there. And it's mad, isn't it? I mean, Williams are one of the slowest teams in terms of their car, but also operationally you're just making silly little mistakes. Getting all of your team members off the grid before the start of the race is just a basic one. A really disappointing one for Williams, and that just wrecked Latifi's race. And then lastly, it was a P14 for Schumacher and a DNF for Magnussen, another Ferrari driver falling victim to reliability issues. So, what did you think of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix? Let me know what you'd give it out of 10 in the comments below. I'd give it a 5 out of 10. Since Australia, Red Bull have now won 5 races on the trot. What's going to bring this Red Bull charge to an end? Or are we now looking at how early are Max and Red Bull going to have this championship wrapped up? Because at the minute it's just all one-sided. Straight on to Canada next week in Montreal, a racetrack that we haven't been to since before the pandemic. Can often be a fantastic race, so I'm really looking forward to it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.